Hello. So we continue with our thread on social reproduction theory, just that the scholars that I'm going to speak about today weren't really writing using the phrase social reproduction theory, but essentially the subject matter of what they were talking about would work very nicely to expand and illustrate what we have already spoken about in terms of social reproduction theory, that which sustains us, that which enables us to come back to work the next day. And what icon or space that we can think of other than the family kitchen, other than the kitchen in the house. And I want to draw your attention to this recent Malayali movie titled The Great Indian Kitchen, which very nicely depicts both the gendered association of the woman as somebody who works in and manages the kitchen, feeds people in the household, as somebody who does that work lovingly but also is subject to and bothered by the drudgery and the expectations that come along with this work. Let's move on to looking at the work of Dolores Hayden. I'm quite fond of her work, and so I thought to present it in this course. Usually she wouldn't be taught in a course on social theory, but I think she made some remarkable contributions in understanding how the built environment works to structure social relations, what it enables and what it constrains. Like myself, so you can see the fondness, she's trained as an architect. She largely works in the area of history of architecture and history of the built environment in the context of the United States. But Dolores Hayden, in looking at the history of the built environment, attempts to understand how the built environment works to transform gendered social relations, race social relations, class-based social relations in the urban context. Let's begin. Dolores Hayden was born in New York City in 1945 to what she calls first-generation college graduate parents, and several of her works I've put up here. She was also writing at a time when there were others who had started writing about gender, space, how the urban is being reconfigured because of capitalist social relations. To name a few, 1961, Jane Jacobs writes The Death and Life of Great American Cities, primarily speaking about how suburbanization has taken the life out of inner city in the United States. Daphne Spain's work and Doreen Massey's work on gendered spaces. Massey's called Space, Place and Gender. We've spoken about Doreen Massey and her book For Space earlier. So all of this is being written around the time that Dolores Hayden is also writing. And Dolores Hayden has in fact recently passed away in 2025. So all the more reason I think that we need to spend some time looking at the fabulous work that she's done in understanding social relations of the built environment in the urban context. Primarily the works that I'm presenting today are her essay from 1975 titled What Would a Non-Sexist City Be Like? And her book The Grand Domestic Revolution. What I think her work does in terms of sociological theory is connect the private kitchen or the private spaces of the home to the public street or the public sphere. And how, one of her central arguments is that you cannot look at many of the essential things that sustain us, primarily care work, as isolated private affairs. These are very important considerations for how public life is shaped and shapes us. So in order to come to that point, she quotes Frederick Olmsted, one of the key landscape architects and designers of the Central Park in New York City. Let me read out that quote that she cites in her book, The Grand Domestic Revolution. Olmsted writes, "Consider what is done by the butcher, baker, fishmonger, grocer, by the provision vendors of all sorts, by the iceman, dustman, scavenger, expressman and messengers, all serving you at your own when required. By the sewers, gutters, pavements, crossings, sidewalks, public conveyances, all infrastructures of modern life, and gas and waterworks, there is every reason to suppose that what we see is but a foretaste of what is yet to come." I think we have been witness to that. As to the economy, which comes by systematizing and concentrating by application of a large apparatus of processes which are otherwise conducted in a desultory way, wasteful of human strength, as by public laundries, bakeries and kitchens, we are yet in America, even in our larger cities, far behind many of the smaller towns of the old world. So what he is referring to here is the work done inside the home and how that is individualized. And this is in fact why he is bringing the two together, is that the urban offers us a huge opportunity. The urban context, with the amount of density of people that it has, with the kind of infrastructures that it makes possible in a public way, it is in fact unfortunate that in the American city of the time that he is writing is yet to make the work full of drudgery inside the homes as part of something that is more collective, as part of something that can happen in a cooperative manner in a public way. So this is one of the central arguments that also Dolores Haden then pursues in her work. So this is an image from her book, The Domestic Revolution, and here she is basically showing the housekeeper's annual and the lady registrar. So all the kinds of works that women do inside the house, and please note, so this is a whole lot of different images in the circle. Most of these works, like the laundry, the sewing, the cooking, the washing, all of that the woman is doing inside the house, primarily isolated, there is no other person around her, and she's alone doing the tasks that are essential to sustaining the home, except for the one in the center where she's minding the children or teaching the children, and in that she has some company with her. So that is one aspect of what Dolores Haden draws our attention to. Then, in a similar vein, she asks us to challenge conventional understanding or understandings of the public and private space. To do that, she says, it requires a spatial imagination. She writes, it requires a spatial imagination to understand that urban regions designed for inequality cannot be changed by new roles in the lives of individuals. So much in the way that, in fact, C. Wright Mills also argues that what we might consider as private troubles, but are in fact sociological phenomena and processes, well, Dolores Haden is also going in a similar direction and saying that just by, saying that in my household the division of labor is more fair, or managing things within the household by bringing in servants that belong to a lower economic or social class, it doesn't really resolve the sociological problem. And what one needs to do is to reimagine the distinctions between public and private. She also, in this sentence, is drawing our attention to the fact that built infrastructures have a long life, right? Human relations might tend to shift, but the buildings probably are there to stay, and therefore to expect that by making one small change or a big change in the social relations or the power hierarchies or divisions of labor in social relations would also sustain, but then infrastructures and built environments constrict us. And therefore, we also need to pay attention to how built environments are shaped, and then in turn how they shaped us. If you remember my lectures from the spatial imagination, then we can go back to thinking about Henri Lefebvre and David Harvey and their work on Right to the City, where they very clearly articulate that more and more of us are living in the urban environment, and therefore the urban environment has a profound effect on who we become. And which means that in shaping our urban environment, or in getting to shape our urban environment, we are getting to have a say in how and what we want to become. This is very similar to the point that Dolores Haden is making, but she's trained as an architect, and she's asking us to pay attention to the built environments around us. Whichever area you inhabit, whatever city, whatever rural area, pay attention, you're inside your homes, pay attention to the built environment that surrounds you, and what impact does it have on the kinds of social relations that it sustains. Alright, so this spatial imagination, she says, was very strong in fact in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and then for some reason, and she'll tell us why, it goes away, right? And so in that time period, in her book, The Domestic Revolution, she documents several movements that try to redefine the work inside the household and collective work in the city. In fact, there is a lot of hope and optimism around the fact that the urban is offering us that space where we might rework several social relations, including gendered social relations, but also class-based social relations in our environment. So she documents work between 1834 and 1926, and then eventually she'll start to show how in the post-war period, in the post-First World War period, things kind of decline from where they had started to progress, to from where more progressive reform was coming, but then it kind of moves back. So I will not go over this whole list that she has in her book, but I'll just draw your attention to a few of those. She writes about the producers cooperative that Pierce in 1868 starts in Boston. Pierce is situated around the campus of Harvard University, and she is very troubled with the idea of doing household work, laundry, cooking, childcare, all of that in an isolated way, and the fact that it is unremunerated work. So she gathers together women from the neighborhood who create a producers cooperative where they cook nutritious food, where they do laundry and ironing and all of that, and then these are offered back to their husbands on cash for delivery. So very, very radical experiment of her time. Then let's look at Jane Jacobs' Hull House in Chicago City, which not just looked at but also practiced how to make immigrants coming into Chicago, which had a lot of immigrants from Ireland, Eastern Europe, several parts of Europe largely coming in, but then not finding the support system in the city. So her Hull House became one such space where women who were also employed and working and involved in projects outside just the domestic realm, and immigrants were given the support that they needed in order to do the other work that they desired to do. Several other, there were public child care facilities that were started, which was also exhibited at the Chicago Fair. And then we've spoken about Charlotte Perkins Gilman's work, but we didn't quite speak about one of her fictional novels, in fact, where she talks about the concept of a dwelling hotel or an apartment hotel. An apartment hotel which would house women but would enable them to go out and work, because remember, she wrote a book on the economy and women in society, where she argued that what holds women back is their subordinate position because of their work being unpaid. So what would enable them to work is if they would get cooked food, if they would get childcare, if they would get support in terms of cleaning and laundry and all of that. And so the apartment hotel would take care of all of these needs, would also have collective spaces for people to mingle, but then also private spaces for them to live. So just a few examples that I've given this. She also speaks about how Engels argued for socialized domestic work, and Lenin in the USSR context actually makes that possible. So again, just a few examples here. This is from the Pierce's example, again from the book Domestic Revolution, where she documents many of these socialized social reproductive tasks. So this is a proposal. It's a diagram of a block of housing. 36 houses is what Pierce proposed, in the center of which you have the collective services. So the collective kitchen, the dining hall, laundry and so on, such that a block of housing can be sustained, and then both men and women are free to go out and explore the other aspects of life instead of being trapped in one. Then she also observes how this tends to start declining. These progress and these ideas that was made in the early 1900s somehow lose the kind of momentum that they had, and are also now no longer encouraged even in women's magazines. So this is the time that Nancy Fraser talks about when the idea of the man as the producer, as the worker, as the wage earner, the idea of the family wage emerges, and the woman is seen as the keeper of the house and then the consumer. A lot of appliances are being brought into the market, and women are meant to take care of the home, but also the idea that the appliances would do away with the drudgery. Well, now initially in the early 1900s, many of the women's magazines actually ended up arguing that really no, it's not necessarily that the washing machine takes away the drudgery. In fact, if you are in a collective space and then there is a machine, there is also the socialization that happens. There can be friendship and there can be bonds between other women. But then when you bring it back inside the house, even if it is using the same appliance, it is still a very isolating experience, and the washing machine can't gather clothes, it can't sort clothes, it can't dry clothes at that time. And so still a lot of work ends up happening inside the house. And the appliance then becomes a myth that it can create more free time or leisure time. This is what Hoes, whom she also studies and I mentioned briefly in that table that she showed, writes in one of the women's magazine. She says, quite apart from the fact that millions of us are not able to command them, that is purchase them, the washing machine won't collect and sort the laundry or hang out the clothes. The mangle won't deal with complicated articles. The dishwasher won't collect, scrape and stack the dishes. The vacuum cleaner won't mop the floor or clean up and put away. So if the kids' toys are scrambled all over the house, then somebody actually has to lift them up and put them in their place. The vacuum cleaner won't do all that. So it doesn't really take away housework. It just automates some part of it. Gilman wrote about this idea that I spoke about in my previous lecture with Nancy Fraser, the notion of the home as this place of respite, as where the angel of the house, the woman, creates this paradise kind of environment for the tired man to come back and refresh and renew himself to be able to go back to work the next day. But Gilman alerts us to the idea that home sweet home never meant housework, sweet housework. It has always been something that required both physical and emotional and mental work. From 1927 onwards, Dolores Hayden observes that women's magazines start to recommend that women buy products that are there in the market. The pressure from advertisers was quite a bit, and so the editors also kind of caved in by that time, and the appliances that were originally meant to be used in collective spaces come into the home, and women's magazines are encouraging them to buy it. So in fact, that's the time when Hoes, who was at Smith College, is asked to shut down her center where she was working on women's education, and also many of these writings that were asking for collectivizing care work, household work, social reproduction work are then no longer being so easily promoted or put into women's magazines. In 1928, an article appears in one of the women's magazines titled Housewives Incorporated, where the argument is that look at all the corporations and they thrive on economies of scale. So you also go out, buy groceries in bulk and still work within the individual household, which is then at that time being promoted heavily because of suburbanization, governmental policies related to the highways, related to easy loans for home ownership, but the strand of collective living, the strand of trying to bring together household work is coming apart. And this is being phrased as consumption or buying of these appliances, buying of the house, buying like into this independent living is somehow equal to women's liberation, right? So this notion appears around the late 1920s in the United States. In the Indian context also, one can think about, in Punjab there was the notion of Sanjha Chula, which means collective stove. So the tandoor would light in the village collectively, and women from various households would come together to make their tandoori rotis and other dishes in the collective space. So it also was a space of friendship and talking to each other and all of that. which when in a suburban situation, when the man goes out to work, he still has that sense of collectivity, but the woman inside the household is becoming more and more individual, more and more isolated. This, as Dolores Haydon argues, was a very thought out and deliberate strategy in order to create a docile workforce. So first, women who had in fact been pushed into working in the factories and encouraged to work in the factories and found a certain amount of freedom during the First World War time. The image of Rosie the Riveter, for example, is one that is very common as an American cultural icon. Rosie the Riveter was asked to retreat back into her homes once the men came back from the war and needed the jobs back again. So that was one. The idea of the separate spheres was much more emphasized. But along with that, the automobile industry, the real estate industry, and also the factories and the industries wanted a docile workforce, which they felt was this idea by the Industrial Housing Associates is that good homes make contented workers, because the angel in the house would be taking care of the house. But also, this is also a quote from her book. She writes, "Get them to invest their savings in homes and own them. Then they won't leave and they won't strike, because you have to pay your mortgage day in and day out. It ties them down so all of them have a stake in our prosperity." How the capitalist ideas then start to take hold of the domestic sphere, the idea of the family, it starts to shape what is an ideal family. The idea of the American dream emerges around that time, with these single family homes being handed out to white men primarily to begin with. So this, she argues, Dolores Haydon argues, creates a sexist city, right? A city where the gender division of labor is mapped out spatially in the way the urban is arranged. And she says the organizing principle of most cities lies in the implicit principle that a woman's place is in the home. And this was leading a lot of women to also not be very happy with being trapped inside the home, because even there was no public transport, and automobile ownership was encouraged, but there was probably only one car in a household, and so women were kind of stuck at home. This feeling is captured very nicely by Betty Friedan, who's a journalist, her work, and she calls it this sense of lingering sadness as the problem that has no name, because apparently you should be happy, right? You have the home, you have all the appliances, you have a husband that earns a family wage, all of that, but they weren't. So this was called the problem that has no name in her work called The Feminine Mystique. Dolores Haydon wants to also emphasize that these logistical problems of being stuck in the home, of not being able to work outside the home because of the care responsibilities, all of that women face are not private problems, even though we visualize them or sense, kind of understand them as such, and they do not succumb to market solutions. So the solution of providing more appliances or highly paid, good quality, privatized childcare doesn't really resolve the problem for everyone. Bringing in servants into the house is only something that the wealthy can do. So it still remains a larger social problem. In order to resolve it, she says, a program to achieve economic and environmental justice for women requires by definition a solution which overcomes the divisions between household and market economy, between the private dwelling and the workplace. It requires a transformed public space. And she's an architect, so she's also, in her essay, what would a non-sexist city look like, giving us ideas about how would one design a block of housing in a non-sexist city. So very similar to the idea that Pierce gave about the 36 houses in a block. Here she has also taken a suburban neighborhood, and in that suburban neighborhood she reworked it. So the top one is all these isolated plots with the houses surrounded by gardens that keep you away from your neighbors. But then she reworks that, and if you see, the dotted part is the private space which each household also has, but then the lined parts are the collective spaces. So there's the collective play areas, there is the collective grocery, there is the collective laundry, there is an outdoor dining space, and all of that. Things that can make household life much more collective and therefore enable a wider array of social relations for both men and women in terms of if you want to work outside the house, it frees you up for doing other things other than just care work. The essay, What Would a Non-Sexist City Be Like, has a detailed description of these proposals. I'm not going to go into them for this course, but I highly encourage you to go back. It's a short and sweet essay if you want to read it. Now I want to shift a little to the Indian context, but also to the city itself. So when we say what would a non-sexist city look like, for us it is also a city where you can walk when you want to walk. You can be out when you want to be out without the fear of somebody assaulting you or even, whistling at you, or you becoming an object of attention, or you being questioned for being outside at a particular time of the day. A city belongs to all, right? Remember, right to the city. And yet, in practice, there are some for whom it is the rightful place to be in, whereas largely for women, even for socially, economically underprivileged classes, migrants, they are seen with suspicion when they inhabit public space. So, drawing on the work of Shilpa Phadke, Sameera Khan and Shilpa Ranade in their book, Why Loiter, I want to bring your attention to the idea that public space is not neutral. It is governed by norms of gender, class, caste, race, age, able-bodiedness, and many more categories that make a hierarchy or who is in place, who is out of place, what is a woman's place, who is a good presence in the public space and who is not. And many of these draw upon safety narratives. Safety narratives, in fact, in this book, the authors argue, are actually restricting rather than enabling. Safety narratives aim to protect, but on the other hand, they constrain and they take away the choice of the woman from choosing to take risk. For example, like you take so many other risks in life. Going into a washroom is a risk because one might slip. Driving a car is a risk because there can be an accident. Getting onto a plane is a risk. But there are risks we choose to take. But by imposing on women's mobility the idea of their own security by others, their choice in choosing which risk to take and not which risk to take is restrained or constrained. And largely, when they are present in public space, it is usually they are supposed to legitimize it by having a purpose. And you would have noticed it. Mostly women walking on a street would either have like a work bag with them or a grocery bag with them. So you can be out if you're shopping for the family or going to work or taking your child for a walk, but to aimlessly roam around for your joy and your pleasure is usually not seen as something that is desirable, especially for respectable women. So the idea of respectability is also very major over here. Working class women, for example, have always been outside. They've needed to be outside for their work. Their families wouldn't be able to sustain if they didn't work outside the house. But pay attention to, let's say, what does it mean when we say so-and-so is an important figure and is a public intellectual, a public man. We usually place that in very high regard. But the moment I use the word, she's a public woman, it usually has a derogatory sense, as if, it's kind of akin to being a prostitute, as somebody, a street woman, a public woman, as somebody who has loose morals. These associations are not to be understood as, exceptions. These are something that structure and define what we are able to do and how sociologically things are put in place. So, these authors, Phadke and the others, argue that the right to the city is not only about moving through space, let's say with a purpose, but also about the right to stay, to linger and be visible. They say what women need in order to maximize their access to public space as citizens is not greater surveillance or protectionism, but the right to engage in risk. I already spoke about this before. They also, I think, very importantly point out that when they are asking for and claiming the right to loiter, they are not looking at loitering as a right that any one group can claim for itself. It's not just about a gendered right, but you cannot claim such a right for itself without claiming it for all, right? So, it is also for the vendors who are nowadays coming under the surveillance of resident welfare associations, or the putting up of gated communities to prevent people from walking around. Usually if you're walking around, then you looked at as suspicious, especially if you're not dressed appropriately in terms of appearing upper class or middle class. Then they add another dimension to it, that of joy, pleasure, of being able to experience space on your own terms and being able to find yourself through an exploration of urban space. So they write, the loiterer maps her own path, often errant, arbitrary and circuitous, making out a dynamic personal map of pleasure. The notion of pleasure is also central to loitering. In this sense, loitering has the potential to create a new sense of everyday embodiment, where one might stretch one's body rather than contain it, where one's body language might express pleasure in public space rather than the awareness of its boundaries. Next time, I would highly encourage you to go out and observe the body language of men and women in public space. Usually, I usually act this out in class, but here let me try and describe it. If you go to a bus stand, you would usually find men kind of sitting with their legs spread apart, their hands kind of like that, but occupying quite a bit of space. And usually I'm saying, not always, women would kind of be walking around like this with their knees crossed on top of the one another, somewhat more constrained. They don't occupy as much space. They try to constrain and restrict their body almost as if they have internalized the kind of normative disciplining that urban space has done, as it does for them. So in Why Loiter, it's a political act, it's a political claiming of that space, of that right to the city. So loitering challenges the norm of the productive body. So one is that it creates a new forms of embodiment, but it also challenges this idea of, always busy, walking to work, getting to work, that you can be in space as long as you're moving through it to get to work, that you are. So the idea of the capitalist worker and the notion of affordability and pleasure. So usually if you have money, you could have a car and drive around the city, get a fancy brand name clothes, walk around neighborhoods in that, and you might not be questioned. Whereas somebody who is not as well dressed might be questioned. So the association of products and their affordability with pleasure is also something that they are challenging through Why Loiter. They also talk about how important urban infrastructure then is to be enabling, to be making possible these kind of movements and existence and presence in space. You need well-lit streets, you need places to sit down and gather, for people to gather, for people to engage, not just in consumer activity, so not just the malls that we have now, but also public plazas, public benches, avenues for people to come together. In closing, I just want to draw your attention to a book I co-edited with Dr. Yafa Truelove, my collaborator and friend, titled Gender Infrastructures, in which we look at how everyday infrastructures of urban space, of water delivery, of sanitation, having public toilets, make certain kinds of gendered social relations possible, whereas others constrained. So with that, I will end today's lecture. Thank you.